Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, back once again in conjunction with Bequalon Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African-centered news and information. And we have a show where we're going to be discussing what I like to call a Black masculinist reaction to Notorious actor Jamal Woolard's comments on the Culture Club podcast. Many of you may be aware of Jamal Woolard for playing the role of Biggie Smalls in the biopic on, of course, the late great rapper Notorious B.I.G. He also reprised that role when he's in the film All Eyes on Me regarding Tupac Shakur, the biopic on Tupac Shakur. And we're here to discuss some of the comments he made on the Culture Club podcast, but also the response from the sisters, right? So I think this is going to be a very extremely telling conversation that we will have this afternoon. If you're watching, family, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well, and do not shy away from, of course, the super chat. So once again, family, you're watching LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction with, of course, Bequalon Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African-centered news and information. And once again, as I said before, this is a conversation that's really outside of our wheelhouse. We typically focus on issues such as politics, education, and of course, addressing, seeking ways to improve the material needs, of course, of African people at home and abroad, with, of course, the primary goal being African redemption. With that being said, we've addressed a number of issues in terms of Pan-Africanism, education, even, of course, education, right? Not only education, but religion. But we think this is a conversation that needs to be had. And so we're going to have a Black masculinist, of course, reaction, of course, to the video that we're going to play. And we're going to kind of chop the video up and, of course, have a conversation. Many of you may be asking, what is Black masculinist? What is Black masculinism? And Black masculinism is an intellectual and political movement and an analytical research tool that centers Black males across age, class, and sexuality, that seeks to frame the actual state of Black male life in measurable terms. And so one of those measurable terms that we'll be looking at, of course, is, of course, dating life, seeking companionship, of course, lifelong partners, so on and so forth. And so, of course, I'm not someone who is well-versed in Black masculinism. Many of you who are, of course, subscribers to the channel may be recall my interview with Dr. T. Hassan Johnson on, of course, his seminal text, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Blackness, and, of course, Black male death, what he calls the Black masculinist turn. And so we really dove deep into, of course, what he discussed in his book. If you haven't gotten this book, I will tell you to make sure you check that out. But we're going to have this Black masculinist perspective. One of the reasons, typically, if you're gone to college, or even just if you're someone who has experience, of course, family court, right? We're talking about many of the laws that are created, and even just the perspectives that you provided on, of course, daytime television. What we tend to find is a gynocentric frame of reference perspective that I think really skews the reality of what typically takes place in relationships, particularly in terms of Black relationships. And so this is going to give us a chance to really look at not only the positioning of course, Brother Woolard, but also the response, right? And I think there's oftentimes some issues that aren't really addressed when we talk about the conversation that was had on the Culture Club podcast. And before we get started, family, make sure we got to go over the ground rules for Lumumba Speaks and Bequalon Network. As you all know, diversity of thought is welcome. So irrespective if you're on the left, you're on the right, if you're right down the middle, you can be a Black masculinist, you could be a feminist. You can be part of this conversation. We want to be part of this conversation. We think intellectual diversity creates a more robust conversation, which we're able to learn from each other and grow and develop as, of course, human beings. No racial epithets are allowed. No racial epithets, family. So once again, no racial epithets are allowed of any kind. No epithets are allowed of any kind. This, of course, is a space of Black empowerment. We believe in the 3 N's of Black power: self-respect, self-defense, and, of course, self-determination. And so if you use an epithet, we will, of course, remove you from the platform. Facts over feelings. So if you're disagreeing with someone, we want you, of course, to address the comment the person made rather than attacking the person. So attack the comment, not the person. No, of course, ad hominems. And then, of course, last but not least, no fundamentally false statements. You can provide an opinion. It could be a prevaricating opinion. We always make the statement that you could be of the ilk, of the belief, that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player ever. However, if you were to say that LeBron James was the GOAT simply because Michael Jordan only won 2 championships, that would be a fundamentally false statement. And of course, we're going to have to tap in and, of course, square things away. And last but not least, family, our mission here at Lumumba Speaks and Bequalon Network is to not neither exonerate or vilify, but to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has previously been accepted as fact. I appreciate you. Snapshot reviews for the super chat. Once again, family, first and foremost, need to thank everyone who comes on, who contributes to the show. As many, I think I shared this with many of you. We had a situation probably about 2 years ago where I did a show on the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson. He's a Black Republican. He was a gubernatorial candidate for governor in this past election cycle. We're talking about November of 2024. We did a show, a reaction show, where he talked about that Black people should not receive reparations. We're talking about African Americans, but that African Americans should pay reparations to the United States of America. I did a reaction show. No one tapped in. It was only about maybe, I would say, an hour long video at that. Discussed how nonsensical this was. I discussed how we tend to find, unfortunately, Black Republicans tend to sacrifice their own self-respect to make these type of claims. And the response that I received was, I got flagged on YouTube. They stated that I had made comments that were akin to self-harm. We don't advocate self-harm in any way, shape, or form at all, ever. Right? If you're having any type of mental health issues, if you're thinking of harming yourself, I would advocate you contact a therapist right away. They have national hotlines that can address those type of issues. Be that as it may, we were flagged. And of course, they demonetized the channel. I appealed. And of course, they said no go. And so it took us literally 2 years to get back to this place. And we wouldn't have been able to do this, of course, with the supporters who come onto the show, who watch the show, that watch the channel. So we're greatly, greatly appreciative of that. It took us, of course, 2 years. We had to get another 1,000 watch hours before we was able to remonetize the channel. And so this is a way, not only are we able to make African-centered Black content, Pan-Africanist content for you all, but also a way that we can support the channel. That way we don't have to worry about asking for donations. The channel will be lucrative enough to where we can fund and finance ourselves. So greatly appreciated, family. Once again, snapshot reviews. I definitely hope to hear from you regarding the conversation. We're going to have the video we're going to play. I'm going to provide my perspective from a Black master's perspective. And then, of course, you all can tap in, be part of the combo. And I'm greatly, greatly looking forward to hearing from you all. And once again, the goal is to have healthy. We want to promote Black love. We want to promote Black love in a manner in which each person, both individuals in a relationship, are valued and respected. So without further ado, family, I'm going to share my screen. And of course, we're going to get to the video. Okay.
Doing things better than my race. I'm
like
gonna keep it
100. My Spanish.
Better. Well, not better, because I know where she getting ready to go. Not better.
I know you said they were doing things better. I wanted to know what better meant.
Not
people for the culture.
So a couple things right off the bat that we're seeing here, right? He says better, and they asked him, okay, what do you mean by that? She says, I'm trying to save you. So I guess what she's referring to is the blowback that he may receive, of course, from the Black female community for, of course, making these type of statements. So, but we're going to keep going. And there's something that I really want you all to pay attention to when the sisters provide a retort.
Better for the culture.
There we go.
Right, not better. I was dating Puerto Rican, I was dating Dominican, I was dating African, I was dating all type of other relations besides American Black, right? They were doing way more of what we expect we want our woman to do more than our American. Our American got real comfortable
Give me some examples.
Oh man, I mean, their mannerisms are different. Like even my Indian one.
And I think he was referring, I would argue he's referring to the women being far more feminine, right? Cooperative, right? Fit, feminine, and cooperative, as Kevin Samuels would always say.
Was from Syria, one of them countries over there, right? I didn't have to really say much to do and be treated like a king. You see what I'm saying? A lot of times with our own American black, they expect so much of us and what we're supposed to do. Like things like if we go out and eat and we just have a nice dinner, we can go anywhere and eat and get a nice dinner. It had to be Rue Chris, or it had to be this, that, or it had to be this, that. Then I get somebody that's just as fine, a Cuban or a Colombian. They don't care about nothing. They care about you and your household, even though they still care about the money, but it's not about the money. You understand what I'm trying to say? It's a difference, not better, but sometimes we get tired of hearing, working bags, sushi.
Do you think that's fair? Because I feel like there's a certain type of woman that does demand that. And to me, I think it depends on the bait you're using and where you're looking. If you're gonna go get a model from Instagram that got the BBL, the snatched in stomach, and has all the things that check off money hungry and surface, you're gonna get that. If you're gonna meet a girl and through different ways and ask different questions, you're gonna find that out a lot earlier on, that what's important to her.
I'm not doubting that, but I'm just talking about, even if you look on just a regular dating app and just look at what a woman may state that she requires.
Right, and that's a great point. I think the sister makes a great point, but the issue is we're finding women who work at a gas station are saying, hey, if you want to F with me, if you want to rock with me, you got to not only take me to a 5-star restaurant, you got to buy my outfit. I mean, it's getting absolutely ridiculous. But once again, we're going to do a deeper dive in a second, family.
You know, and I'm saying these things because it feels as if social media again is the barometer, okay? And it's the comparison. And when you're comparing yourself to all these other women, and of course, even with the BBLs, because I'm like, that's fine, but I mean,
what's BBL? I'm sorry.
Brazilian butt lift.
Oh, okay.
And it's no shade to women that have them. I'm just saying.
I was wondering. I was waiting for it too. I'm like, excuse me.
It's no shade to everyone that has them. I'm just saying, if you're going by just surface things and that's who you're going afterwards, then guess what? She gonna run them pockets.
No. But the bait is they're blaming the man, right? You see that here. They're not addressing the fact the woman is money hungry. The woman is being what some would argue a pretty bum. She's begging, etc. She's trying to leech off someone. She's trying to use someone financially. It's the man's fault that he's come in contact with women who are seeking to take advantage of him financially. So once again, with something to consider when we talk about some of the deeper, broader ramifications of this conversation that's taking place and what it truly reflects, of course, in society.
Well, and I'm not, and I want to get your thoughts, Doc, and as well, Amy, as a woman dating or even considering, I think that a lot of times, you know, we do value women, but when you talk about Black relationships, I think we all come with some baggage, all right? Now, some of us have some baggage that's not gonna fit in the overhead compartment, and some of us have some baggage that you're gonna have to pay a whole lot more for to get on this flight, right? But the reality of it is that's just who we are, and I'm talking about historic. Like if you're talking about being enslaved, where we were and how we engage each other, there's a lot of elements there. But it can be a little difficult because women have expectations in 2021 that they're watching, and they're very material expectations. I agree with you, Claudia, but I'm simply saying that
not all of them are material.
And I'm not trying to generalize.
It's just
women.
Most of the time it's pointing to American women are more material.
And it's America as a society.
Not better.
Let's bring spirit. Let's bring spirit into this.
And I gave you the space to even edit the better part, right? So and I'm with you on that. But let's say this because.
So this is what I want you all to truly pay attention to, because this sister's a PhD. But I want you to. Matter of fact, I'm not gonna say anything yet. I'm gonna let her speak, and then of course we're gonna have a conversation.
You guys both tie in two really important pieces, right? You talk about women who are not African American women, and you talk about the experience and what is the influence here. You mentioned social media, but what you're really missing here is the piece that you talk about, the enslavement part. The culture and the trauma that African American men and women and children have faced in this country is unlike any other group. And so when we talk about trauma, what we know is that Black people have a lot of unprocessed trauma. We have a lot of hurt. We have a lot of harm, not just back then, but right now on the daily, right? And so one of the things that we talk about as professionals within my profession is we talk about how trauma impacts people.
So a couple things, family. I got to stop it. So one, one of the things you're going to see in this conversation is this sister's a PhD, and this is something that takes place not only in civil society, but particularly in academia, in which they do, and you're going to see this in the conversation, the brothers aren't able to intellectually challenge what the sister is saying. Now, the sister is a PhD, so am I. She states that Black women, due to the history of chattel enslavement in America, have a level of trauma unlike any other group in the world. That is patently false. Remember, here on Lumumba Speaks, we talk about one of our core tenets, core rules is no fundamentally false statements. Black women throughout the world, particularly here in the diaspora, suffered the indignity of chattel enslavement. So that's a patently false statement. So what we're finding here, she's using slavery as an excuse to, as an excuse for women, particularly African-American women, to behave in a manner that's untoward, unbecoming, antithetical to developing meaningful and wholesome relationships that lead to what? A traditional family. So be mindful of that, right? She says African-American women have a level of trauma that is unrivaled by anyone else other in the world. The second issue is when you actually do research. I'm actually reading a book now on comparative slave cultures of the United States, Brazil, and Cuba. We find that African people, many scholars argue, were treated worse in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America than they were here in the United States. And there are different reasons for that, right? But the claim she's making is patently false. But what you're going to find is the brothers aren't able to push back because they do not, in my opinion, have the knowledge base or intellectual acumen to do so. And as a result, it allows her to dominate the conversation and shift the issue from the issues that the brothers are stating he experiences as a Black man dating. And mind you, he is married to a Black woman now, to what? The trauma and the issues Black women face. So we're seeing this shift here, and she's using, of course, her credentials and scholarly frame of reference to do that.
And so we love to say, Resmaa Menakem, one of my favorite colleagues, he says that trauma decontextualized within a person looks like personality, and that trauma decontextualized within a family looks like family traits, and that trauma decontextualized within a people looks like culture, right? And so when you talk about how African-American women present and what they need as it relates to security and finances and the finer things in life, and to look a certain way and to want a certain thing from their man and to have certain expectations, it's because of the trauma that we are still trying to survive.
So once again, I have to disagree. I would argue that someone being hyper materialistic, engaging in a hyper form of conspicuous consumption, and one is a byproduct of living in a capitalistic society that is extremely materialistic, right? That's one. Two, there are women in society who don't think and act that way, right? And so once again, I think this is a situation where she's making excuses for bad behavior, which is something that you should never do. Something to consider here.
5. And when we talk about feeling beautiful and the BBLs and the Birkin bags and the wanting the nice things and wanting their men to come with a certain level of care and a certain level of treatment and expectation, we are trying to connect. We are trying to heal with you.
So once again, she's being intellectually disingenuous. Anyone that comes to you and says, to take me on a date, you have to buy my outfit. If you have to buy me a $5,000 purse, that's not someone who's trying to connect or heal with you. That's someone who is trying to use you for what you have financially. So she's being extremely disingenuous, but she's extremely polished. She has a professional effect. And so as a result, it comes off as she's dropping jewels, right? So she's being disingenuous. And Dr. T.S. Johnson talks about this in his book, this concept of, I think it's called, let me see if I can pull it up very quickly, family. Yes, a coarse and refined anti-Black misandry it puts on an academic veneer, right? There's an academic veneer to anti-Black misandry to where a person is able to articulate and speak in such a coherent and charismatic manner that you start to believe that the gaslighting, language that they're actually using. Once again, no one who will come to you and say, you have to do X, Y, Z in order for us to even date is someone who's trying to connect and heal with you. So she's been extremely disingenuous. Shout out to Mr. Sandman, women outnumber men. Any man with positive qualities, i.e., money, looks, charm, can get a woman fairly easy. When women become accustomed to a certain lifestyle, they gain materialistic expectations. Great comment. I would argue, however, we're seeing women come with materialistic expectations and they don't have that lifestyle, right? I mean, we're seeing women, once again, on dating apps, women who work at gas stations, women who are cashiers at a supermarket. And I'm not making light of these type of jobs, because we know there's dignity in all work, not some work, family. There's dignity in all work. However, what we find is a lot of this is being influenced, once again, by social media and by popular culture, right? And so what happens is women say, okay, well, Cardi B said it, Megan Thee Stallion said it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to incorporate this into my life as well. You know, Malcolm X talked about many of our people have a television mindset, a television vocabulary, and a television worldview. Their view of the world is based on what popular culture is, right? So something to consider here. I'm going to put the name of the book in the chat, brother. No problem. But I appreciate the super chat, Mr. Sandman. The solutions for anti-black misandry. Blackness and black male death. The black masculinist term. But and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because based on her education, she's able to dominate the conversation. And we see this a lot in higher education, where they purposely create environments, conversations. They set up these conversations in which the women are able to dominate because the men aren't able to challenge them intellectually. So what you're going to find is when the brother who's the co-host, when he tries to push back, he's fumbling over his words. The brother, the actor, Brother Woolard, he doesn't even provide a retort, right? So she's able to dominate the conversation by making claims that are patently false. So something to consider. Let's keep it going.
We are trying to build with you, but there's so much hurt and trauma that we all have that we don't talk about, that we don't even understand within ourselves, so that we can't find who we're compatible with, because who we're compatible with is traumatized versions of ourselves.
Spirit, do you think that women and men, women that
and here's the other issue. She's normalizing dysfunction. She's making the presumption that every single person, black person in America, is traumatized, right? I've studied cultural trauma. I've studied generational trauma from slavery. I would make the argument as someone who's actually studied these issues that very little of that has to do with women being materialistic. Very little, if any, right? I would make the argument that when we talk about beauty standards, that is something that derives from, of course, that the Holocaust of enslavement, and also, of course, colonialism, but and the indoctrination of miseducation. But to make the argument that you're going to someone that you've never even met before and you're saying, you got to pay my bills. Are you ready for these bills? So on and so forth. That is not someone who is trying to bond with you. That is not someone who is trying to heal with you. That is someone who is trying to use you. That is someone who views men as disposable, which we know is a concept that is a derivative of feminism, particularly the concept of the disposable male, and view men as fungible, easy to replace. So not saying the actual value in that person, but simply seeking to extract what value they can take from said person.
That seek the materialistic things, items, the tangible things, and men that just seek the women for the aesthetics. Do you think those are people that kind of just gave up on love and they're just like going for, all right, well, at least I can see this, I can grab onto this?
No, I think it's science. If you really want to know, we are part of the animal kingdom like anything else. And so what the male species chooses is the thing that's biologically beautiful, because what it suggests from a DNA perspective is you're likely to bear my offspring and they will do well. It's survival of the fittest. And what the female species chooses is the male offspring that can provide the most security.
So once again, she's halfway correct. But men do not say, if the woman's beautiful, my children are going to do well. That's just nonsensical, right? Now, women tend to, yes, I want someone who's put together financially, who can provide so that, our children will do well, we can have a family, so on and so forth. But so once again, and that's the issue I have, is because she's the PhD in the room, she's able to make claims that are patently false, subjective at best, even intellectually disingenuous, and there isn't any pushback. And I argue that that was purposely done. That was purposely done so that when these brothers state, hey, this is how we're experiencing African-American women, as opposed to Black women from other countries, Puerto Rico, Colombia, so on and so forth, the pushback is, well, no, the issue really is you, and you should actually acquiesce to these women's demands because in some twisted sense of fate, in reality, these women are trying to bond and heal with you.
Because you're going to be able to protect me and our offspring and raise us, and we will do well.
So we're not gold diggers. It's just science.
It's literally biology. It is literally biology.
We
When
have
you
our
see,
own
listen,
different.
listen, when you see the brothers out there with the rims and the flash and the money and the gold, they're no different than the male peacock that's showing his whole big pretty feathers. Look at me, look at me. And when you see,
but once again, see, stereotyping an entire demographic of men. Most men don't move that way. Most of the individuals who had those type of cars, so on and so forth, we know they tend to be dope boys, or even young men who, you know, are kind of just being flashy with what they have. That is not a representation of the majority of Black men in America. So once again, she's stereotyping. She's really doubling down on a stereotype about Black men, right? She's not talking about the Black man who's educated, who's incisive, who has a career, who has a 401k, right? She's not. So once again, she's doubling down on the stereotypes about Black men, right? And really saying, once again, she's saying it without saying that the issue is actually your fault.
see the women that go, show me what you got, show me what you're working with. It's no different than the frog that ribbits the loudest, or the bird that chirps the loudest.
So what do you call a man that's just been providing, that doesn't ask for nothing? What do you call a guy?
The other issue, and we're gonna get to his question, is she's equating Black men to animals. She's equating Black men to animals. When she discusses Black women, she talks about trauma. You can see that there's a care effect, right? When she talks about Black men, she literally makes comparisons with Black men to animals, not human beings, not talking about generational trauma from the Holocaust of enslavement. She's comparing Black men to animals. And this goes back to this concept of what coarse and refined anti-Black misandry that puts on an academic veneer to anti-Black male hatred. So it sounds good. She's intellectual. She's composed and she's charismatic, but she's literally equating Black men's behavior to that of animals. How problematic is that?
Guys like me, who we don't ask for anything.
Oh, but you do.
How?
You may not ask it with your words, but your expectation is there. So when you say, I need that woman that loves me, I need that woman that has my back, so I don't have to say, hey, is that bacon and eggs there? Hey,
Okay,
are those clothes in the drawer?
Not cash wise. Okay.
So when we talk about compatibility, right, one of the things that I love to say, an acronym that I use is rises, that some relationships rise, some fall. You want one that rises. Rise stands for the different types of intimacy that make us compatible.
Lead attorney here. Hope you.
All right, family. So, yeah. So tap in, family. Want to hear from you all. The link is in the description. Once again, Brother Chris Jones, we don't want to attack the person, just attack the argument. The link is in the description. The link is in the chat. Tap in and be part of the conversation. What are your thoughts? I gave, of course, my perspective on, of course, the interview. I think, to be quite honest with you, the woman was the sister, right, because she is a PhD, was full of ish, right? She was full of bull. I think a number of all of the claims she made, of course, were nonsensical, problematic, and just simply not true. The biggest issue I have with that is the fact that one, she equated Black men to animals. Whenever she talked about Black men's behavior, she equated them to animals, right? It was animals. When it came to Black women, you have to have care, concern, consideration. You know, they're dealing with trauma, etc., right? But also her dominating the conversation, intellectually making claims that, of course, someone easily, I would argue, would be able to push back. But those brothers did not have the ability to do so. I would argue that that was set up, that was done purposely. And of course, even, you know, gaslighting those brothers into believing that if a woman comes up to you and says, if you want to take me on a date or just to get to know me, you got to do X, Y, Z for me, that woman's trying to bond and heal with you. Completely false, prevaricating claim. And so, family, tap in and be part of the conversation, because I think What we're seeing, I would argue, of course, is what Dr. T. Hassan Johnson talks about in the seminal text, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Blackness, and Black Male Death, the Black Masculinist Turn. And that is what? Coarse and refined anti-Black misandry, which, of course, puts on an academic veneer. And I'm going to read this section from the book. And then, of course, Snapshot Reviews are going to tap in all the way from jolly old London. So he argues the 11th form is coarse and refined anti-Black misandry. Coarse anti-Black misandry refers to the blatant dehumanization evident on social media. We saw the dehumanization of Black men, where she was, of course, equating us with animals, right? The comparison for Black male behavior was an animal, not a human being, an animal. Much of it centers around criminalizing Black men on carceral issues. It is often crass, offensive, and brazenly misandric. An example such might be when Black men are referred to as bullet bags who should die because they are less capable than white men, a term that trended on Twitter in 2021. The other term is refined anti-Black misandry, and it's more reserved. And this is the example that we saw in the video. It deceptively appears objective. Especially when espoused by professional feminist judges, academics, politicians, or therapists. This sister, of course, is a therapist. Often, their arguments stem from the subculture of violence theory and intellectual justification for anti-Black misandry, rooted in racist white ethnology. It can purposely be targeted to harm or be passively aggressively dismissive. I would argue that the form of refined anti-Black misandry that we saw in that video was passive aggressively dismissive. Once again, Snapshot Reviews, what's the word, brother?
Oh, good afternoon. How you doing? Oh, 1 second, yeah, just give me 1 second. Sorry, just as you brought me on, my dinner went off in the oven. Yeah, I'd not heard of this Culture Club platform before, but I did recognize the host from that clip that you shown, and I think she was on a show called Fox Queens or something like that.
Absolutely, yes.
And they seem to be very, very hostile at times to like Black men and masculinity and stuff like that. Like they seem to be very much sort of on this Black feminist direction. And what you find is, or what I found is, that when Black people, and particularly Black women, when we take on board these kind of social phenomenons, or whatever you might call it, like feminism, we take it to an extreme that even the people who started it don't go to. So the people that started feminism, they weren't really saying, abort our male children if we are pregnant, or you know what I mean? They just take it to an extreme, and it's not good. But I think and at the risk of stepping on a landmine, I don't think that these modern women, if that's what you want to call them, demanding all this materialistic stuff, I just don't think that's got anything to do with slavery.
No, absolutely not. Like I said, it's just so once again, when we talk about refined anti-Black misandry, passively aggressive, dismissive.
Yeah. And
right. We're talking about the gaslighting. We're talking about being intellectually disingenuous, and she was able to get away with that because she was the intellectual superior to those brothers who were on the panel.
Right. And it's always like that, isn't it? It's like there's never a male equivalent of that same intellect on that panel that can battle back. It's always top heavy on that side, and I just don't understand why. When you try to correct them, or when you try to say, or when you try to lead, or you try to do things, I think it's like they feel like you're being toxically masculine and that you're trying to oppress them, when you're not. Actually, you're actually just trying to lead, or you're just trying to do your role. I think some of the stuff the guy said might be true in terms of being able to cooperate with partners from.
Well, I've experienced that. You know, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I've dated sisters who weren't African American. They were, of course, Black. You know, we always been Black over here, And they tend that this culturally they're more cooperative, and that's why I stated when she made the claim once again, those brothers weren't able to push back intellectually.
Push back on it, yeah.
That Black women, African American women have suffered a level of trauma that is unrivaled. That's not true.
But you see, the thing is, it's not
Black women in the diaspora all were enslaved, irrespective of what country you. So that's it's like,
But this isn't a Black American woman thing, really. If you think about it, America is a hyper-capitalist society.
Absolutely,
where there
American
are
women behave that way.
Yeah, where there are a lot of people that show. You know, if you live in somewhere, I've never been there, but if you live somewhere like Miami or somewhere like that, you're going to expect the women there, or especially if you go looking for women there, you're going to expect them to be a bit superficial, a bit sort of surface level, and there's no depth and all of that sort of stuff. But that doesn't translate over to a young woman you might meet at the library, or you might meet while you're in you're shopping, or you're just doing regular stuff. It's I don't know, man. Sometimes I think and it's not just an American thing. I just think I see it with Black people over here as well. Sometimes I just think we're just extra hard on each other when we don't really need to be. And I just think that sometimes when you try to offer some sort of, not criticism, but just some sort of course correction or some sort of thing like that, you're always going to get this sort of segment of the community that are always just going to push back by blaming you and not actually really thinking about what is actually being said.
Right. And if Mr. Sandman says, I thought the female doctor had valid arguments, I think we're misunderstanding the context of a statement. So you could tap in and do that very quickly before we get to LMA, brother who dribbles down the VA, and Sister Michelle. Want to read this. This comes from Dr. T. Hassan Johnson. Of course, I've had him on the show, and I cite his work regularly. He's a colleague of mine. I think very highly of him. He wrote this article. You could go to his website, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. And he posted this on February 27th. Okay, I allow you to serve me now. But one of the things he talks about is what is expected out of Black men, right? And he says, even now, when they make videos on social media talking about the value of Black love, he's talking about Black women, they mainly talk about a self-serving interpretation of a traditional relationship where men provide resources while they fail to mention or even consider what they would reciprocate in kind. So then we talked about at the top of the show, in a healthy relationship, both people's happiness is valued, right? They voice that they want Black men to do everything, including shovel snow, provide chauffeur services, babysit, fight off strangers, deliver meals, randomly buy her gifts she can show off to her girlfriends, provide so they can quit their jobs and do nothing at home. This is what they think traditional housewives do. Anticipate her moods and preemptively prepare to make her feel good, perform mind-blowing sex, but only on her terms and time schedules, give unending emotional labor for providing non-advice-based listening for indefinite periods of time, buy her houses, provide sperm on demand if she wants babies, accept that she may have pre-planned divorcing you, afterwards only to hit you up for child support and even for babies you may never wanted, cook meals, raise their children from previous relationships while they pursue other ventures, fight or attack previous baby daddies. This is what Dr. T. Hassan Johnson calls pit bullying. Buy cars, buy expensive jewelry, bags, and shoes, offer prenuptial agreement, free marriages, pay for expensive trips out of the country, routinely take her to expensive restaurants, pay bills, of course, and be lovingly supportive, even in when she wants to leave you arbitrarily. This also means they stay readily available to take her back when and if she wants it, and demand that anyone you may have met in the interim to prove your love to her. Few men are interested in being anyone's temporary life raft, only to be discarded the next time she thinks somebody has a boat. And P.S., most of the time, they don't. So once again, fam, that is an excerpt from Dr. T. Hassan Johnson's article, Okay, I Allow You to Serve Me Now, on his website, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. So once again, family, and here's the thing, and I'm not going to, of course, spill the tea. Some of the things he mentioned, I've experienced. Literally. I've experienced being in a long-term relationship with a woman, and then arbitrarily she says, you know what, I'm leaving you because she met someone who and she thought the grass was greener. And then to come back and say, hey, why can't we be friends when things, of course, the situation blew up in her face. So I know what he's saying is true. I myself have experienced it. But LMA, and then, of course, we would turn over to Sister Michelle.
Hey, what's going on, Dr. Lil Moon? I don't know. This is a tough one for me. I kind of agree with the PhD lady to an extent. I do think that, particularly here in the in Black America, is, like I said, it's crazy out here for everybody. I think both men and women have issues, and I think that we run into this problem where it's like, the men want to, say what their grievances are, and then the women come back and say, well, it's the trauma, it's whatever, right? But if the flip side, if the women were to say, hey, these are the problems we have with you men, then you would see some guys say like, hey, it's the slavery, it's the Jim Crow, it's the yada yada yada. I think that one of my favorite YouTube commentators, he says, what do you say? We've been prolonged exposure to poverty, right? I do think that there's something to it. And another thing, I think that Black men, Black women, we're not monoliths. I do think that there are some women who are like that, but I don't come across them too often. I mean, I know how to avoid them. I know they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you can spot them out or whatever. But I don't know. I just feel like it's just the women that he deals with, that he's the circles that he runs in. You're gonna find this type of attitude, but you're gonna also find the same type of attitude amongst the men in that group too. Like, so I'm not saying that his experiences are invalid. I just feel that he just needs to change where he's looking. I feel like especially in these kind of high social economic ladder, social circles where like I say, kind of like if you're looking for a wife in a club, like what do you expect? What do you think you're gonna find in a place like that? Like I think there's places that you can go if you're trying to find fulfilling relationships, and there's some places you just don't go. Like if you just want to have fun, you want to flaunt your money, pick up a little, I don't know what you can call them, but a little one night stand or whatever. There's places you can go for that. There's attitudes, there's mentalities you have for that type of circumstance, but you cannot bring that type of circumstance and then or go to that area looking for and then expect the women not to act that way. I just think he's just looking in the wrong place. I think a lot of people kind of fall into that situation where they're just kind of looking for love in all the wrong places.
Respectfully, brother, I would disagree. As I stated, I've met women who work at a gas station who are making those type of demands. Literally.
Yeah. I mean, but like I said, I've met, okay, well, like I said, I've like I said, I guess the circles I run in, I don't really have that issue. I think it's just an issue.
I don't think it's an issue of the circles you're running in. This is, for example, and then I gotta let you, of course, push back. And of course, we're gonna bring Sister Michelle in. My uncle told me this when I was in my early 20s. He said, nephew, you're gonna meet women and they're gonna start asking you to pay their bills from the moment you meet them. And I said, get the French toast out here. That's not gonna happen. We fast forward 10 years, that is a reality. You meet a sister, she has a regular job just like anyone else, 9 to 5, doing whatever. And if you want to get to know me, you're going to have to help me pay my bills. These are people you can meet at the gym, the supermarket, downtown. Like literally, this is a real issue that men are experiencing. And it's not just, somebody I met at a club or on Instagram. This is a real issue to where women are saying, well, if you want to take me on a date, you got to buy my outfit.
Yeah, I mean, that's, inappropriate. And, most people aren't going to go for that. Maybe she gets success for that. I don't know. But I guess what I'm getting at, there is a cultural issue that we have. I think that, I don't want to come off as saying we have bad culture, but I think our culture has been poisoned, and that poison is manifesting itself in certain ways within the men and the women. And I think this is just one way. And I think that this is one way that it manifests itself. But how can I put it? I don't know. I just don't want to fall into the issue of like we're pointing the fingers at other people without pointing the fingers at ourselves. Like, I mean, there are grievances that both men and women have of each other, and we should address those. But sometimes I feel like it turns into this. I can criticize you, but I'm not willing to take any criticism.
Well,
I'm not saying that you're doing this, but
I know.
But here's
the thing, and this is why I say, this is why would be my response to this. And you know this because you're a man. We're always open to critique and accountability. What we find, and you could argue maybe this is something that's been going on the last 15, 20 years, is that whenever someone expresses grievances about a woman or women, the pushback is, well, what about what men do, so on and so forth. And we saw that, of course, on that snippet, right? The passive aggressive, being passively aggressive, dismissive, extremely problematic. So then our issues and grievances are never actually addressed, and they throw it back onto, well, what are you doing, so on and so forth. So like you stated, the fact that this brother said, well, really all the brother wanted was reciprocity. Okay, if I'm doing all these things, providing for you, can you make me breakfast in the morning? He said, you may not say that, but that's what you want. And she said it like that was a problem.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because it's one-sided. There's no reciprocity. So these are the issues that we're finding, and I would argue that this is a byproduct of a gynocratic, of course, community. This is a byproduct of feminism playing a role in how women view relationships. So is what? Once again, this concept of the disposable male. Men are fungible and they are easy to replace, and so you simply extract what you can from that individual and move on. You're not a person, you are an object to be used. Sister Michelle, we're going to allow you to chime in. Appreciate having a sister here on the show and in the conversation.
Hi, good afternoon. I appreciate your insight, brother LMA. Again, I at one point bought into that theory of women and so forth. But until I started working human services and working through the court system, working through human services and understanding how the system systematically attacks these relationships, and now has manifested itself, especially in Black pop culture. Therefore,
I'm sorry, it's two things. Could you provide examples of how the system attacks Black relationships, and could you provide some examples of how it's manifested in Black culture? Would love for you to do that, sister. Go right ahead.
Sure. Okay. One example is the child support system. Years ago, I was supporting a family with the child support system. There was a lot of underlying issues with the woman and a lot of underlying issues with the man. But the court, again, because of confidential, I can't really go into detail.
Right,
but because the court system automatically favors the woman.
That's true.
So she was manipulating the system to her favor. And I had an issue with that. And I even told my supervisor, I said, I have an issue with such and such a person because what she's doing is not right. The father wants to do what's right as best as he can. I understand the father has limited income. But again, she was one of those high demanding stuff. He wasn't meeting her needs, such and such and such. The man's family wanted to intercede in terms of caring for the children. She wouldn't. I mean, it was just crazy. But when she go to court and play the system,
mm-hmm.
and the court will favored her.
Absolutely. Very quickly.
Okay. Then also,
go ahead, sister. I'm sorry.
And then again, this is an issue where she felt tired because she was trying to get her Section 8. She was trying to get all these benefits, as opposed to seeing how we can work this out, showing her children, hey, let's work together. Let's work through this. Even though we can't be together, let's work through this as a family. But no, it had to be about her. This is just one of my extreme cases. It had to be about her.
Absolutely. Real quick, Mysterious World states, I don't think it's about black and white. I think it's about Western mindset versus the rest of the world. I would agree with you 100%, brother. I would agree with you 100%. Chris Jones says, I blame the sisters. It's not sugarcoat this, right? There have been some scholars that argue that, of course, some black women, not all, have taken on this great weight, that the great bribe, of course, dismissing the brothers, and of course saying that my success, and Dr. T. Hassan Johnson talks about this concept in pop culture that your money is our money and my money is my money, right? So we see this, of course, pop culture playing a role. So shout out to Mysterious World. And Snapshot Review says if Beyonce worked at Burger King, she could still marry Jay-Z. If Jay-Z worked at Burger King, he could never marry Beyonce. So we see some of the double standards in terms of financially for, of course, black men, and well, just men and women in general, particularly here in the Western world. So let me ask you this question, Sister Michelle, and this is something that the PhD sister brought up, in which I, of course, disagree with. And we're very quickly, family, because many of you, some critics may say, well, you're providing pushback on your own channel. And I'm telling you all, I have reached out to Foxwood Sisters. What was the name of that show? But the Snapshot Reviews.
Cocktails with Queen.
Cocktails. I've emailed them on several occasions asking to be on the show. I've reached out to the Culture Club asking to be on the show. I reached out to a number of these different podcasts and asked to be on the show, as of course Dr. Lumumba, right? And I literally never hear back from them. Dr. C. Hassan, and I'm not of the ilk of Dr. C. Hassan Johnson. I am an administrator in higher education. Dr. C. Hassan Johnson is a full professor. So he went assistant, associate, full. However, we had this conversation offline, and he shared with me what we tend to find oftentimes is they do not want brothers on the show, one who are going to promote, of course, we can argue, a Black masculinist frame of reference, but also who are able to intellectually challenge the misinformation and false claims and gaslighting that's being made on these shows. Right? So as I do, that oftentimes this is purposely done. Sister Michelle, go right ahead.
And also, my concern with those type of shows, as you shared, even I'm a female, I'm concerned, what are you doing in terms of ensuring continuity of our community? Having these extreme views, to me, is problematic. Again, I work in the Black community day to day. And these extreme views are transitioning to day-to-day life.
Yes.
And it's not helping us.
Yeah. See, this is why you got to be on the show on a regular basis. You know, you spot checking us. We need you here on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Where you been?
Because the issue I have with those podcasts, those type of podcasts, they're not talking about us on a day-to-day basis. They're not talking about day-to-day issues. They're not talking about, if you notice, they're not really talking about the day-to-day stuff. Like, for example, I just was talking to someone. Her rent just went up $200 without no warning. Mm-hmm. So how does that impact her relationship with her man or her baby's father? See, you're not talking about the real day-to-day issues that could possibly impact the relationship. So now she may have to figure, I'm going to have to take this persona of, if you want something from me, you got to pay me. But the reality is maybe my rent went up. And just have a real conversation as a family system about addressing this, as opposed to thinking, absolutely, you need to pay my meals and all that stuff. Let's stop that. Let's talk about everything as a community.
Right. I would agree wholeheartedly. And so, very quickly, Brother LMA, Brother Dwayne Omawale, we know we had him on the show 2 days ago where we were honoring the 129th anniversary of the Battle of Ottawa that, of course, preserved Ethiopia's sovereignty during the First Italian-Ethiopian War. And he talked about, we had this conversation offline. He said, well, one of the issues with a lot of these shows that speaks to Sister Michelle's point is the conversations they're having are unproductive. Would you agree, Sister Michelle?
Yes. Again, because many of them are not, again, is the shock value, is the views, because, the status quo really is entertained by Black dysfunction.
Right.
And that's another level, I think.
Absolutely. Brother LMA.
Hey, this is like a brief aside. I think for your the next time you reach out to one of these podcasts, I want you to do a little experiment. When you write your email, don't say that you're a doctor. Don't put your background. Throw a couple of grammatical errors in your email, and just kind of do it up, and then see what your response is, and see if they put you on the show then. Because I do think that there is a effort to kind of make a power imbalance when it comes to these podcasts and the panelists up there. So I can definitely see that happening. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a pilot study, and I'm going to do it because I'm going to do it, and I will, of course, share with you all here on the platform what comes of that. Because I say I've been reaching out to them, and I've heard from no one.
Yeah, make sure you're extra belligerent too. Like you're just extra. Just make sure you're extra belligerent in your email and all emotional, and then, like I said, see what the response.
Tap into my.
I can see that.
I'm gonna have to tap into my 2002 self, right? Go ahead, Snapshot.
I always wonder with these kind of conversations why women who have got an alternative experience, that have a positive experience of these kind of issues, why they're never ever given the room to speak, or sometimes some don't even correct the stuff that some of these women are saying, and always kind of wonder why that is. But when you just said just now, a lot of these conversations are not productive, are not designed to be productive, that probably just hits the nail on the head. I mean, why do you think women don't question or challenge the other women? That, like, I've seen it in my community where there are women who can see the younger women in their family are going down the same path that they've been down, but they don't put them to the side and say, hey, actually, I can see you're doing this, this, and this. Well, this happened to me, and sis, it don't really work out that well, because it's like they just let them go into it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I also think, if I may add, I also think subconsciously they're jealous. I've seen it. Like, there's a level of jealousy within ourselves. Again, I really, hypothetically, I wish like we could have like hundreds of years as Black people just by ourselves and addressing our unresolved issues socially and emotionally, because you have to understand we're also dealing with external factors and how we deal with day to day economically. Everything is really controlled by another group, and we're still trying to survive. And I think we getting misconstrued in all this, and it's just causing a big block of confusion. Like, for example, I wish we could not, if I had my way as a human service worker, all family issues should stay out of the American court system. We should have a body of people of the community, men and women, to address, child support issues, family, period. Why are we going through this institution to address our needs? And I think a lot of it stems from us going to outsiders to address our issues.
That sounds like
and then some of these so-called psychologist ladies that be coming out here, some of them have issues in themselves, that so they cannot take their issues away to deal with what's going on in this current situation. Because I've seen that. I've seen people who are so-called trained, and they come in and project their issues in this person's problem, and it's sick, and it's confusion. Again, when we and a more who are more willing to speak out of it, we're silenced. So it's like, I got to live my life. I have a life too. So do I want to take this on? But I appreciate Brother Lumba having this type of forum where we can have these discussions. I think these are productive discussions. I think they're leading discussions. So hopefully, we get some change in our community, because there is no benefit in our progression as a people, as Black people. That's the ultimate reason why they don't want to see us progress. Because if Black women and men get along, that's why you had us buying homes together, homes for 30, 40 years. Because now, because of dysfunction, that's part of the reason why we're getting gentrification. Part of the reason why we have gentrification that's so bad here in the DMV area, because we don't no longer have to work together. We don't no longer feel the need to work together. I'm bad. Like, for example, I just had a family lose a house. One of the children lives somewhere else. Nobody's is seeing the beauty of working together as a family to save the house. So.
Right. Matter of fact, and I'm glad you brought that up, sister. I'm glad you see. This is why we need you on the show. Like, we really need you to become a regular contributor. I'm asking you publicly if you could become a regular contributor to the show. Could you provide a perspective?
I'm anytime. But sometimes I don't get the I hope you're not being shadow banned, because sometimes I don't get it. Sometimes I get it after the show.
Yeah, I've had people tell me that they don't get notifications even though they're subscribed. So that may be the case. But I want to read another excerpt from Dr. T.S. Johnson's article, and it really speaks to some of what you were saying, right? So he argues that Black men have been trying to say since the 1980s, when all of this independent boss babe narrative began, was that we need to work together. We try to tell them that the jobs they had that made them feel superior to men could be taken at any moment. He says, I witnessed this in the 1990s, but he says that part of this was due to a superiority complex, right? So he says, truthfully, both employment and entrepreneurship has not offered macro-level Black economic stability, particularly on a multi-generational level. And this is not accidental, right? He argues that this is not accidental. He makes the argument that Black economic viability has been under attack since Reconstruction. It has been undermined at every turn by policy and or violence. You can use your job working for a person or an institution in a heartbeat. Similarly, the overwhelming majority of Black entrepreneurial businesses never make it off the ground. And without inherited wealth, much of the time we are starting and running businesses on fumes, even without a brick and mortar address. What Black men have been trying to tell many Black women is that the only way we can do that is together like our grandparents and great grandparents did. But this narrative of if you have to make more than me, 6 figures to be worthy of me, and your money is my money and my money is my money, stifles cooperation and trust. Because we've made little headway on those two fronts in the last 60 years or so, considering gynocentric welfare, higher education, and white-collar employment options. Men have thrown up their hands and sought peace on their own. And honestly, we drug our feet for too long before we get into this point, searching for alignment with women who don't have that collective philosophy or ongoing monk all together. Any thoughts on that piece?
Oh, that's a good piece. Are you able to send a link so I can read it in detail on my own time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So he is someone I would argue is one of my intellectual mentors, right? And what really brought me to Dr. T. Hassan Johnson's work was my own personal experiences. Many things he was writing about. I mean, if you haven't, you need to go, of course, check out his channel where he discusses these issues on a regular, but things that I actually experienced. And it led me to, of course, support his scholarship and that, of course, of Dr. Tommy J. Curry as well. So any other thoughts? But LMA snapshot reviews. Overall, what were you all's thoughts on, of course, the segment I showed with the actor Jamal Woolard?
I guess for me, from my perspective, I don't necessarily know that it's necessarily a Black woman issue. I just think it's a result of, like I said earlier, living in a hyper-capitalist society, and that just framing people's mindsets is to like consume. It happens here as well. Like people just are just over consuming. But one thing I would like to see more people in the community do is when they're getting advice from these people that seem to understand about relationships or all this kind of stuff, just look at the results of that person's life, and does the advice that they're giving translate over into something that you can see them, that they've got to that path themselves? Because if they haven't, they can have an opinion, right? Everyone's welcome to an opinion, but you got to then take the advice by a grain of salt. And I just think we have to develop the maturity to be able to just do that. So some guys telling women, oh, you need to be married by so and so and blah blah blah, and this person is a 2-3 times divorcee that, you know what I mean, ain't really made it work for themselves. Your voice.
So are you saying, before I go off what you say, I need to first look at what you do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. But very good. Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, I'm sorry, not Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, Dr. Hakiar Matabuti, he wrote a book titled Black Men Obsolete, Single, Dangerous, the African American Family in Transition. The book came out, I believe, in 1990, 1991. But I actually got to meet him when he signed the book. There's actually a picture on my Facebook where I'm cheesing like a little kid while he's signing the book for me. But that's something he told me personally. He said, before you go off what anyone says, first look at what they do.
Absolutely. And I know we're not like real big fans of Christianity and the Abrahamic religions here, but one of the things Jesus said was, there's going to be many false prophets that come after me. You will know them by the fruit of their labor. Like,
hallelujah, brother. Hallelujah, brother.
Huh?
Hallelujah.
Yeah. You know, but it's true. You got to
absolutely
see what is actually coming through. And I just think that people just need to have that bit of maturity for themselves. And as men, we should never lead with our wallets, and women, you should never lead with your body.
Right. Absolutely. And that's something, I'm glad you brought that up, Snapshot. That's something I talked to my daughter about. And I told my daughter, you know, she's a teenager now. Lord have mercy, right? And she's, you know, developing and right?
Yeah.
But we were having a conversation once. You know, I do this a lot. Yeah, I'm very intentional, extremely intentional with my children. And of course, part of this is because I always wanted to have children, but also be a father. A lot of people want to have children, but a lot of people don't want to actually be a parent. Actually desire that. And so doing the work that comes with being a parent, not just the flashy, sexy things where you're taking pictures on social media, but the real work that takes place behind closed doors, I value tremendously. And so I was having a conversation with my daughter, and I said, I'm telling you as a man that if you ever lead with your sexuality, with your body, to an incisive man, it means you don't have any value. And I told my daughter, I said, same as a man. If a man leads with his wallet, that means he has no actual value. He doesn't have anything tangible as a person to offer.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of his person.
Yeah.
Right? And so I said, that's something you need to be cognizant of. Right? And so we've had those conversations. You know, there's sometimes where, you know, kind of like what I'm doing here, we would do one-on-one. I would play an episode from Divorce Court and say, okay, I want you to watch this because this is how some men are. And there was an episode where the brother paid all the bills. And he said, because I pay all the bills, I could do whatever I want, including cheat on my wife. Yeah. Right. And the judge said, the only thing worse than being married to this man for 8 months is being married to this man for 9 months. He is morally bereft. He has no morals whatsoever. He states that he can cheat on you because he pays all the bills. She said, you could do better than that.
Yeah. It's right. All this kind of stuff that just leads to a warped sense of entitlement and a warped sense of reality. And that's why it's so important for women and men that know better to actually say and speak up when they see especially younger people kind of going astray. And it's good to hear that you're doing that with your daughter, because I think a lot of people would kind of shy away from kind of conversations like that and that. But you know what I mean? You're doing a good thing, man. I don't need to tell you that, but you're clearly doing a good thing, man.
Yeah. Brother LMA.
No, I think this is a great conversation. I do think, like I said, there's, you know, it does become, it's a touchy thing to like lob, what's wrong, not invectives, but like to give criticism to other people, especially in this male-female dynamic. I do think that Snapshot made a really good point about, you know, we live in a hyper, you know, capitalistic, hyper-consumerist society, and that, you know, it's going to affect our women. You know what I'm saying? So
it affects the man as well. It affects the man as well.
Yeah, it affects men as well. You know, like I said, you can see, you know, you can see it in the type of women some of these guys, you know, pursue, and then they're upset when they find out that they're, you know, only looking at them for the money. You know, kind of like what Snapshot said. You know, if you lead with your money, you know, don't expect for her to look for you, look at your personality. And I think, and you know, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the brother Jamal, you know, but I will have to see how he interacts and where he goes and how he's moving. Because like I said, I think there are just places you can go if you want to meet women who are more, what's what I'm looking for, who aren't as materialistic like that. I think there's ways you can carry yourself and there are places you can go to find women who are like that. And part of me just feels that a lot of there's a I would just like to see, because I feel like sometimes these guys are just going to the wrong place and then, you know, expecting some type of intellectual, caring, mature woman, and they're just going to all the wrong spot. That's a part of me feels that way. But at the same time,
I understand that, but I would say from personal experience, this is something that has become almost ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like I can say, it's like I said, it could be, like I said, they look on the media and they just think that this type of, you know, almost like what, you know, back when Kevin Samuels was alive, you know, there's a lot of women who thought that, you know, that what they were looking for was all over the place. Like the type of man you're looking for is like literally the top 1% of men, and you think that you qualify for that. And, you know, I think that's just what it is. I think a lot of women just don't realize, a lot of these women don't realize how rare what they're looking for is. Yeah, I don't think they understand the economy that they're in.
Yeah, I've seen situations where women were married, and because the guy had a nice car, she was willing to cheat on her husband, just because the guy had a nice car.
Yep, that's superficial out here. Yeah, that's super.
Literally no sense of commitment whatsoever.
Yes.
If I meet someone and I think they're doing better than you financially, I'm going to leave you for that person. This is something that has become normalized, what we like to call hypergamy in Western culture.
Hypergamy.
It's just the reality. Yeah.
Well, I think monkey branching.
Brothers at the gym about this all the time.
May I also dip in. But also, whereas at one time black men were on code at one point in terms of not messing with a married woman or messing with a woman who was in a committed relationship. And I think, again, like you said, this culture of debauchery we're in now has allowed us to facilitate it, because that dude with the car, she's with somebody. You can say no, and the woman,
he did.
At one point, when do we say no? We're not going to entertain this. We're not going to participate in this type of stuff. When are we going to say that? Because other communities do that. They self-regulate themselves out of keeping, because they want to keep the continuum of their community and their culture, so they don't indulge in certain behaviors. But it doesn't stop them from going to other communities and indulge. Because a lot of people, because another thing you don't understand, a lot of communities, because I work with women who were in the sex industry, a lot of communities were coming to the black community to indulge in certain activities because they knew they couldn't do it in their community.
That's true. Yeah,
and that's a conversation that we also need to have.
Yep, Malcolm X talked about that in his autobiography.
Yeah.
No,
I think that's like an economic thing.
Because I was working with a young lady who was dealing with a guy from a Middle Eastern country, and I'll just say that. And I was like, why you? And she thinks she was the eye of the pie of him. Coming to find out, he was just using him because he didn't want to go into his community. He could not engage in those type of things they were doing together. That's a whole nother discussion within itself. But because they want to keep stability in their culture and their community, they don't even entertain it. So guess what? They come to us for this stuff, and nobody wants to have that type of discussion.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Great comment. Yeah, but I think, like I said, a lot of this is just an economic thing too. I feel like even to Sister Michelle's comment, like I said, those women were in the sex trade, and I'm assuming because of financial reasons. So I think that, like I said, is our culture, we've been poisoned externally. Excuse me, we've been poisoned from an external source, and I think that poison just manifests itself in different ways.
And then what took me in that particular situation, she was just so thrilled that a non-black man took interest in her. But I'm like, he's just using you for his purposes. You're not even looking at it I guess maybe because I see it from a different angle, but she was just so glad that a non-black person was entertaining her.
Right.
So that's a whole nother conversation for today. So, we got to deal with our divestors. And I'm like, you need to be careful with this, because he's really not trying to go so far with you. He's just using you for the moment. You guys are going here and there. You're enjoying yourselves. For him, it's good because it's not compromising him in his culture. He doesn't have to answer to you, because if something goes wrong, who do you take this man to? Because that's what I told her. I was like, if something goes awry, you gonna call the police on him? I'm like, you need to be careful with this. And she's like, yeah. But she was just so enthused that it was a non-black person that was entertaining her. But he was just using her, of course. And these are type of things we need to have a discussion about.
And if I could hop in there,
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Am I coming in good?
Yes, you are.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah. So the female doctor that was on that show, I believe she had some violent points, and no offense, Dr. Lumumba, but I believe that you just earlier in the show you contradicted yourself somewhat.
Okay.
You stated that the doctor was equating men to animals, yet you have said in the past that you're an atheist. Therefore, by being an atheist, you believe that humans are just an extension of the animal kingdom. So why would that exclude us from being compared to an animal?
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Right. So I would argue you're misconstruing, but I'm glad you brought that up, because this is what we seek to do here and have intellectual pushback, and that's how we learn and grow as a people. So two things. My atheism has nothing to do with believing that we are an extension of the animal kingdom. My position is based on science, and science shows that we evolved from primates. My issue in terms of the sister is that what she was doing was dehumanizing, because when she talked about Black women, she didn't use animals as a case study or as a equivalent example of Black women's behavior. But when she was talking about Black men's behavior, she kept, of course, referencing going back to the animal kingdom when she talked about Black men. I would argue that is dehumanizing in nature. And one of the reasons I mentioned that was my first year in my PhD program, I was writing an article, writing a paper on Black male issues in higher education. And I actually wrote the term Black men are an endangered species. And the teaching assistant, who's now a professor at the University of Buffalo, white guy, he said, let me talk to you for a minute offline. I said, yeah, what's going on? He said, you shouldn't use the term endangered species. I said, why not? He says, because you're not Black men are animals, they're human beings. And I said, oh, he said, that's dehumanizing language. And I said, wow, like, hey, I appreciate you pointing it out to me. And he talked about that a lot of people use dehumanizing language when talking about Black men. And he said, this was an example. So I took umbrage with that.
But do you think it could have been, she was just using what sort of analogous? I mean, she was just using I see what you're saying. Like, you can probably,
but here's the issue. And part of this is based on my experience in the academy. This is typically done on a regular basis, where when we talk about this, once again, this concept of refined anti-Black misandry, where they would do it in a very casual but intellectually astute way of equating Black men to animals. This is something that happens on a diurnal basis in the academy, particularly by Black female academics and therapists.
Are you just talking about just the subtleness of it?
That someone as lettered and someone as credentialed and well-read and well-spoken and as seasoned and scholarly as her, you can use examples that aren't analogous with an animal to discuss and describe Black men's behavior. For example, real quick, when she talked about Black men's behavior, she didn't cite the blue collar brother. She didn't cite the white collar brother. She didn't cite the brother who was the executive. She doubled down on the stereotype of Black man with the spinning rims. That was not done by accident, because she's speaking to how she views Black men and what she thinks of us. I'm gonna land my plane there.
Do we know what her marital is?
But Dr. Lumumba, I've also experienced, so again, as I shared, professional Black women who are, trained and credentialed, also use as a tool to help bring Black men down. Okay, because of their own.
Sister Michelle?
I've also worked with Black women.
Sister Michelle.
Working with Black women who've been used to bring Black men. What did I say? I was.
Okay, I got you.
They're trained. I've seen it. I remember working with this unquote unquote psychologist, because we had a young man who was having, problems in school, ADHD, a plethora of challenges. And I was talking to her about, maybe we need to get some Black men mentorship. Let's see how we can surround him and support him. And she was like, we're professionals and we can do it. And then I had to step back, and I'm like, I'm telling you, my mind, I just had to step back and say, is this lady serious? I said, yeah, we are doing it, but we need to do it and engage a positive male role model for him. But she was like, aren't we enough? I said, he has his mother. You see the father's a disappointment. I said, yes, the father's a disappointment, but there's still other men in the community we can reach out. There's men here in our center. We can possibly get involved. I mean, my mouth just dropped. So then you get somebody like her, then she gets a platform to go on these podcasts, and you see how she's sharing stuff. Making the analysis for the animals. Yes, I do see it as demeaning and degrading, but there's nobody to check her on that note.
Exactly, and I make the argument, and once again, family, I want to say this because, as you all know, this is opinion right now. This is not law, right? This isn't fact. And this is anecdotal for me, based on my experience in the academy, the ivory tower. I've seen this done on a regular basis. And if you push back, if you say, hold on, you don't need to, equate me and my behavior to that in the animal kingdom, what will happen is you typically will be attacked person. That's why, one of the core concepts we practice here is facts over feelings. You attack the argument, not the person. I had this happen to me. And the professor said, well, you're using your masculinity to control the conversation. I said, no, any person with a modicum of self-respect will push back against someone stereotyping them as X, Y, Z. So this is something that we tend to find as part of the culture of the academy, particularly when you go into graduate school, right? Undergrad, not so much, but in graduate school, this is something that is I mean, you're talking about the atmosphere is literally made up of these type of anti-Black misandric particles.
Also, if I could add, just a quick question about that female or the doctor, the lady that was on the show. What do you think her PhD is in? Do you know what it's in?
I think she's a psychologist, psychiatrist. I first became aware of her when she was on Dr. Phil's show, and there was a Black girl on there who said that she was white, and the Black young lady was making a number of stereotypical comments, degrading and demeaning comments about Black people. And the sister was on there and said, I'm a PhD, I'm a therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, something like that in Atlanta. I would love to work with you. That's when I first became aware of her. And then, of course, so I see it here as well. And family, I've tried, like I said, I've been doing this probably for about a year. I've tried to make a foray into, of course, being a public intellectual, and not just to boost my own, self-image, but also because, and as Sister Michelle can speak to, and I think if Ella May, Sam, and even Snapshot, what needs to be said isn't being said in these public conversations, right? The perspectives that need to be presented aren't being presented in these public conversations, right? And oftentimes they aren't bringing brothers on. Like, they will bring men on these platforms, but they typically don't bring brothers on the platform that are able to challenge intellectually and provide a incisive, right, historically accurate analysis of the issues. What we tend to find is that they will bring someone on like, and I'm not trying to throw shade, someone like Anton Daniels, right, who they're promoting a perspective that's based on what's best for a particular political party, not what's best for us as a people.
Yeah, I can understand that. I believe that when doctors come together in their own discussions or in their own arguments, maybe the conversation might get a little too technical or advanced for the common layman to comprehend.
That's a good point, brother. That's a very good point. Very good point.
And with her having a PhD in psychology, she probably couldn't resist the temptation to manipulate the conversation because she knew she was talking to a person who wasn't versed.
Yeah, I could not push back intellectually. And so one of the things, and I'm glad you brought that up, and you all know this, I promote this concept on the platform, but even, of course, in the classroom, is I argue that we are organic intellectuals. You may not have mastered the academic verbiage, but you know what the French toast is going on, and you can communicate that in our own special way. And when I saw it, the first time I watched the video, I said, I got to do a show on this, because you could tell like the brother just kind of shut down.
He shut down when she hit him with that one saying that she probably read this, or maybe she wrote a thesis on it, where she said that when you decontextualize a group of people or a situation, it could be construed as a what did she say? She said it could be
personality
as a personality,
but here's my issue with that. It sounds good, but that was nothing more than hyperbole. It sounds good because what happens, and particularly in these Black feminist spaces, and I'm making the presumption that this sister is a feminist, right? But I would say in these Black female talking spaces, is the presumption is always if someone's doing something that we believe is problematic or adverse to our best interest, or their best interest is because of trauma. That is not always the case. Right? And so the trauma is used as a scapegoat for holding
Dr.
someone
Lula.
accountable for their
Thank you.
actions.
Well, it's not.
And
It's not a personal trauma. I don't believe it is. I believe it's a situation where our ancestors, they had a particular type of culture, and when we were stripped of that culture during the transatlantic slave trade, then we lost that culture and we became like some mutation of a Western culture, but like a subservient version of it,
Well,
which has grown us to this particular type of way. Because so our ancestors, when we were back in Africa, they believed in equality, you know,
right.
in between us. You know,
But
we all work together.
I would disagree. I've consistently made the argument that the concept of Black people being stripped of our culture is a half truth, right? As I said it before, and we've talked about this on the platform before, there are numerous examples of African cultural retention and African diaspora culture. The second issue is part of this, and Brother Snapshot Reviews talked about this. This is a representation of what? Living in this present society, right? The second issue is, and I've doubled down on this numerous times, so maybe this is just, you know, the hill I'm going to be willing to die on, is this type of behavior is a representation of people not valuing another person. As I said before, to make the prevaricating claim that when a woman says, if you want to date me, you have to take me to X restaurant, you have to spend X amount of money on me, you got to buy this outfit to go on a date, is not representative of someone who is trying to build and connect with you or heal with you. This is a representation of someone who is trying to use you for what they believe you have. Right? And so for that woman to make that claim, which is patently false, there's no way that you could ever, in my opinion, make a scholarly argument to where someone who's doing that is trying to build and develop something serious and substantial with you. It's nonsensical. And so these are some of the things that take place in these Black feminist spaces. And once again, those brothers did not have the ability to push back. Because my son at 12 years old would have said, that doesn't make any sense. If you're trying to build with me, why are you trying to tap my pockets? It has nothing to do with cultural trauma. But that is the cover that's used to what? Not hold a person, particularly women, accountable for their actions. Because as you saw, passive aggressively dismissed his concerns of what? These were he talked about this. He's married to a Black woman. He says, when I dated Black women from other countries, they didn't behave this way. And the Black women in other countries, and here in the West, suffered the indignity and dehumanization and desecration of chattel enslavement. So what we're talking about when she made the claim, well, Black women suffered a trauma unrivaled in the world history, is she's trying to make Black women a member of the Special Victims Unit. We're talking about law and order. And so because we are special victims, we cannot be held to the same, accountable or held to the same standard as anyone else in the world or society. Sister Michelle, go right ahead.
Well, Dr. Lumumba, what you said is multifaceted. I don't want us to minimize the trauma Black women have experienced and continue to experience through generational trauma. It is there. It is there. But another thing I've noticed is that people have now made it a moniker, which I don't appreciate.
Yeah.
That we cannot push through it. I'm not saying we should erase it or not talk about it, but now it's used as an excuse for every problem we have, which I don't appreciate.
Absolutely. And like I said, that's one thing. Trauma may manifest in a person that's unable to trust, or the person doesn't know how to communicate in a healthy manner, right? The person may be in a situation where because of the trauma they experience, they may disassociate themselves from relationships out of fear of being hurt again, right? Trauma may manifest in a number of ways, but trauma doesn't manifest, at least from in terms of, I just met this person and I'm telling them you have to take me shopping.
And
I just met this person, and you know what? We just met, and I'm going to go start something with someone I don't even know, and you got to go beat the person up for me. These are things I've experienced, with black women who were in law school. Law school.
Yeah, a lot of times these young ladies, particularly African American women, you know, in the United States, where they grow up without a father, they don't understand the intrinsic value of a man in their life outside of what he could provide financially or physically for them. So,
but it also speaks to how they view black men, right? Dr. T.S. Johnson talks about this in his book, and then of course on his blog post with his article he wrote, of course, on newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com, is we see this concept of seeing black men as less than. There's a superiority complex here, to where you have to be a attack dog, what he calls the pit bullying of black men, right? To where you're supposed to serve me, do what I say, follow my lead. So it's not just that. It's also we're overlooking the fact that a lot of these women view men as less than them. This is why we find these women talking down to men. This is why I think we did a whole show on the concept of the husband-son crisis, where you have women who have achieved a level of socioeconomic, of course, well-being, academic well-being, purposely pursuing men of lower socioeconomic and educational status so that they can dominate the man and wear the pants in a relationship. This is something that is purposely done, irrespective of if she had a father in her life or not.
And this is
they have a superiority complex. And I've experienced this to where when I've met women and they find out, oh, he's a PhD, he got this going on, they literally ghost me because they realize this isn't someone I can manipulate.
That you can do, yeah. And this is why I
can't manipulate him, so I don't want to be with him.
And this is why I ask, what was the marital status of that doctor that was on that panel and some of the women that are leading this conversation? Because if they haven't got that model where they've seen men who are worth a damn, they've seen men who are of that level that challenges that, mind you though, even though I say that, there'll be some women out there that have first-hand experience of that's against the gynocracy's narrative, but still won't say anything. Mm-hmm. So it kind of swings around to us, but this is why you have to really look to what's going on in this person's life who's given out this knowledge, and is what they're saying matching up to the outcomes that they're doing. And if it is, maybe you listen. If it ain't, take it with a grain of salt and move from there. But we have to have the maturity to be
absolutely. Yeah, and as I said it before, if we take anything home from this conversation, family, is that in a healthy relationship, both people's happiness is valued.
Dr. Lalumba, if I may ask, this and these type of scenarios that are happening in Black relationships between men and women, can you also discuss or transition? I'm not sure if you can do this. Increase relationships of lesbian relationships in the Black community, where women feel that I can get a man who meets these criteria, so they turn to a woman thinking they're going to get like the same results, and it blows up in their faces. That's another discussion.
Sherazad Ali talked about this, and when she first talked about this, of course, she was kind of dismissed as she's anti-academic. This is a woman who's promoting a form of internalized misogyny. Now we come full circle 30 years. One of the things that we're finding, and so I'm glad you brought this up, Sister Michelle. Like I said, this is why we need you to be a regular contributor. I've read a lot of LGBTQ, I've read a lot of queer literature, because this is something that was required in my program, right? And so part of being a well-rounded scholar is you read literature outside of your wheelhouse or your particular scholarly frame of reference. And I have some of the literature over here. One of the arguments that oftentimes is made from the LGBTQ community or from a queer lens or framework is that queer relationships, meaning non-heterosexual relationships, are healthier, not only emotionally, but also sexually, so on and so forth. The data actually shows there are higher levels of domestic violence in, of course, lesbian relationships than in heterosexual relationships, particularly in the Black community.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and this isn't like data being skewed. This is coming from, of course, law enforcement agencies.
Not only that, there's a higher rate, well, maybe not so much the female and female relationships, but especially the male and male one, it's a higher rate of all of that.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you, but a snapshot.
Oh, I don't know what your background noise is there. No, I'm just saying that not only the domestic abuse, but there are higher risks of sexually transmitted diseases and things like that.
Gotcha.
In that sort of wheelhouse, Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting because it's like it just seems like there's just so much effort towards this permanent gender war, or this wedge
Yeah.
between the black man and the black woman, to the point where they even the people themselves feel like they've got beef with each other when they don't really. In a lot of instances, it's not that deep. You just need to learn to communicate better.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. I think the gender war is another form of divide and conquer. But when we had Brother Dwayne Omawale on, of course, the resident historian here at, of course, Lumumba Speaks, one of the things he talked about was one of the reasons why the Ethiopians were able to defeat the Italians in the first Italian-Ethiopian War was because the Italians did not use the practice of divide and conquer, and of course, Emperor Menelik II did. He actually used different European powers against each other to acquire the modern weapons needed and necessary to be able to defend his nation from, of course, the encroaching Italian, of course, or colonial army. So something to consider there. But I definitely would agree. I would argue that this is a form of divide and conquer, and as Sister Michelle stated, it has far far-reaching ramifications. Part of that being financial and the inability to own and develop generational wealth. I could think of my grandparents or my maternal grandparents who, of course, the home that they, of course, raised my mother and my aunts and uncles in is still in the family, even though my grandfather transitioned, right? My parents' home, they purchased that home a year before I was born. They still live in a home. And when they transition, that home was remain in the family, right? So talking about developing generational wealth, I think that it inhibits that when, of course, one is engaging in these type of divide and conquer gender war tactics.
But then also, can I also say, as a collective, we need a medium to start teaching our children in terms of basic interactions with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So when they start dating and they start meeting other people, they don't come to the table. I need you to buy me this. I need you to take me to Ruth Christie's for my first date.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I've seen it with. I was working with a young lady a year ago or so, and she's like just 17 on the cusp of 18. Talk about the guy got to take her to Ruth Chris. I was like,
well, yeah. As I always say, I don't gotta do anything, right? So once again, we see the sense of entitlement as well. And to speak to something Snapshot said, something I shared with my daughter was, I said, if you aren't able to be emotionally mature, and by emotionally mature, we define it as one's ability to communicate how they feel and what they want in a healthy manner. I said, you will always be in a dysfunctional relationship. Always. Because then the issue won't be what you want. The issue is going to be how you're speaking to the person.
exactly.
And I was lucky enough to grow up in a household where I never saw my parents argue. The first time I saw my parents argue, I was 23 years old. 23. The first time I saw my parents argue. I went over to my parents' house and like get a pot or something. I was gonna make some type of beef roast or something. And they was like, they came, if the role was reversed, where they were coming to me to try to explain what the problem was, like I was the parent, right? And I remember being like, well, this is, I'm not accustomed to this, and I just grabbed the pot and I left, right? But I say that to say my parents, and I always give thanks for them, and I tell them this on a regular basis when I go visit them, is that I appreciate the fact that they were intentional in terms of not only wanting to have a family, but also in terms of the way they raised us. For example, my mother was a stickler for, she would not allow myself, my sister, or my brother to even jokingly speak in a disrespectful manner to each other. So I remember there would be times where we'll go to the corner store. If you're on the East Coast, it's known as the bodega. And we'll say, well, you go get some Nihilators, some M&Ms, whatever. Come back home, you're eating them, and you say, hey, let me get some of those Nihilators. And if yesterday I said no, my sister would say, well, some type of brother you are. And my mom would jump in. You can't talk to each other that way. Or we say, hey, can you go into the kitchen? Can you get me some water? You go give them a cup of water. Say, thank you, my faithful slave. We used to do stuff like that as kids, right? And my mom would jump in like, you can't talk to each other that way. I don't care if you're playing or not. So my parents were very, very big on us respecting each other. And that carried over in terms of me normalizing that in a romantic relationship.
That's interesting. Those are some good stories, actually. I've got some similar ones.
Shout out to the 90s, right? The young folks say we done with the 90s, but shout out to the 90s.
Yeah.
Then another issue I had years ago, I had a young man who went away to school on a sports scholarship. And he became endeavored with a young lady from the dominant culture. And the reason why he became endeavored, long story behind the story, because she had a 2-parent family. He grew up in a single parent family. Mm-hmm. And so he just admired that the fact she had a mother and a father in the home and they accepted him. And, so I mean, I could see a myriad of issues since I've been working in human services that I've only catch a snapshot of. And I like, what if we could actually capture all this and really develop a program and systems to help our community?
Right. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, sister. And I got a question for you after I make this comment. And I've read feminist literature. In feminist theory, the belief is that not having a father in the home is actually beneficial to the development and socialization of the children. We know that is adverse to facts, but that is the actual fundamental aspect of feminist theory. So they actually advocate for the removal of the father from the home.
And do you know why that's false? Because when the child does well, all praises and accolades to the mother. But when the child does bad, all flipping negative critiques to the father.
Second issue, we also find that children have higher levels of low self-esteem, higher levels of having behavioral issues, and are even more likely to be victims of physical or sexual abuse when the father is not in the home.
Yeah.
So we actually find that the child's out, and the child has a higher likelihood of becoming ensnared by the carceral state and even abusing drugs and alcohol. So we actually find that the child's outcomes diminish significantly when the father is not physically present. So, of course, that is the claim that their position is adverse to the facts and the best interest of the children, but that is something that is part and parcel, a core aspect of feminist theory. Now, and this is one of the reasons why many people took umbrage, not with Black Lives Matter, the movement, but Black Lives Matter, the organization, because they actually advocated and it stated that they wanted to envision a community in which Black men were absent for it. And very quickly, families, let me read this from, of course, Dr. C.S. Johnson's text. He talks about it here. We talked about this concept of the Black masculinist turn. He states that there is a palpable disdain for Black men to which men are starting to respond from both the fringes of Black feminism to the everyday realities within coupling and family formation dynamics that have been intensifying for decades. So that's some of that academic verbiage many people may not be able to catch. But he argues detected in experiences that range from ignored intimate partner violence, sexual assault practices in both boys and men, to social expectations of men in dating, Black men find that they are hated and often observe that they have been hated for generations, even within their own families. Their fathers and grandfathers too have been hated. The proverbial you as a Black man has been contended with hatred and social disdain intra-communally for generations. And it finally becomes most apparent when the most visible social protest organization in the last few decades profits from Black men's deaths while celebrating the idea of their very absence from Black families. This recognition of this disdain is the framework of this book. It is the foundation of the Black masculinist term.
Also, if I could interject, make no mistake. I mean, I've been married for a long time and I've been outside of the dating market, but make no mistake about it. I understand that women are highly intelligent, and they have a tendency to manipulate people, if they find that the person is somebody they can manipulate, and they know what they're doing. Sometimes they'll act innocent, and I don't want to make a sweeping indictment of all females. But if it's a man that they're truly interested in, she's going to know how to act. Mm-hmm. But if it's a guy that she's not completely interested in, then, she's going to basically treat him like, a piece of trash and use him for whatever she could get out of him, until she finds the man that she really wants, so, and then their mood will change from time to time. But that's one thing that I agree with. And we both, all of us have our opinions about the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad and some of them saying, But one of the things that he used to teach his brothers is, because we all know that females mature faster than men, that when you are
I
seeking,
would question that, but go right ahead.
okay, yeah, when he said he said that when you're seeking a spouse or a wife, that she should be half your age plus 7 years. In other words, if you're 30, you should have a woman that's 22.
22,
You know,
right.
yeah, because if the woman is close to you in age and she matures faster than you, then she's going to take advantage of the situation because she's a little bit more mentally mature than you. You know,
Well,
so I'm saying,
but if I could, that's not, in my opinion, that's not why Elijah Muhammad made that claim. I argue he makes that claim because he had a thing for younger women. Because he also, because I've read this literature, he also said that men should be with women who aren't who aren't attractive. That way, you don't have to worry about them cheating on you. This is something he also stated, and I know because I've gone to Nation of Islam meetings. I've even gone to study groups. Most of the brothers, their wives are very difficult to look at. So there's a lot that you can unpack from that. But when people say women mature faster than men, it's in terms of physical maturity. Women tend to hit puberty at an earlier age than men. This is why if you go to middle school, most of the young ladies are taller than the boys, right? But I would not argue that it's a situation in which if the woman's the same age as you, and somehow intellectually she's going to be your superior. That all comes down to how the person was raised, educated, and socialized. But like
yes,
I said,
but you can also say that hormones also affect the way that your brain functions and grows as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a woman that matures faster hormonally, might have more of an impact on the development of her brain. You know,
well,
plus a woman's brain works a little bit different. Like men are more left brain, whereas though we always focus on one thing at a time, while women have a ability sometimes to juggle on multiple tasks. And I don't know all of the neurological
I
science
don't
behind
know
it.
how true that is, but what I would say is from having two teenagers, I haven't seen. I would argue neither one has shown a higher level of maturity based on their age.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I only
Yeah,
have
I have two
I only have
teenagers.
male sons, so
Yeah, I have a boy and a girl, son
okay.
and a daughter.
One of the ways I think that we can counter sort of like false statements being made, like what the doctors or typical women, the Fox Queens types, is, and this is going to involve our children, is we have to get better at raising our sons and daughters to be husbands and wives.
That's very true.
There are other communities out there that from the time the young lady is of an age where she can work, she's saving up to contribute towards her wedding. There are communities where young men, when they have that rites of passage, and it's now, son, you're not a child anymore, you are a man now. Here are some things that are expected of you, and it just helps them to just really think about what's coming next for them in life, as opposed to, okay, you're 18, you have to leave the house now and figure this stuff out by yourself, sort of thing, that unfortunately a lot of young black people find themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really think it's that, because if those young women and men are raised to be husbands and wives, when they hear nonsense like this from someone trying to give them advice that don't make sense, they can push back themselves. You don't have to worry about, are they gonna, well, you have less of a worry about whether they're going to be informed in the wrong way and that sort of stuff. So it really does go, and that would be quite a good cultural shift as well, I think, if we are preparing our young people for that, because the best ways to compound wealth is home ownership and marriage.
Right, and the thing is that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we're going to get ready to close out. But even in all right, Mr. Sandman, appreciate you tapping in. One of the things that we find, even in the academy, when they talk about barriers to Black people developing wealth, building wealth, they never mention marriage and home ownership. They always talk about all these other issues, right? So that is something to consider as well, and it's extremely, of course, problematic. And then, of course, we even find oftentimes some. I remember we was having a conversation in my class about I was black to black family, and I played a video where a woman was saying, well, one of the barriers to developing, black families and marriage is, the black man being ensnared by the carceral state. So one of the sisters in the class was from Ghana, black woman from Ghana, and she raised her hand and she said, well, I disagree. She said, it's not. She said, well, if you don't want your husband to be in prison, she said, it's very simple. Don't marry a man who's a criminal. I said, exactly.
Facts. Absolutely. Facts. Because
right, so we talk about that speaks to what if you're raised the right way, you could push back against a lot of this nonsense. But right? Also, you don't have to worry about your husband being in prison if you don't marry someone who engages in criminal activity and behavior.
But this also speaks to another issue as well, where the more I sort of like delve into these spaces, the more I'm starting to realize that do black people actually want equality in society, or do they want privilege? Because why would you expect to get with a criminal and expect all sunshine and roses and it's going to end up as a happy ending when that never ever happens?
Right. Well, and LMA, I would love to hear your perspective on this, but my view is that when you're dealing with someone who is a criminal, criminals don't think like rational people, right? That's why growing up, my father and grandfather always taught me that a criminal mind is a super mind, and I've of course passed that down to my children, that a criminal mind is a super mind. But also people who are criminal sympathizers, they don't think like a rational human being. They don't. Yeah. Criminals or criminal sympathizers do not think like rational human beings that understand that there's a cause and effect, and that if you do something wrong, you're going to be held accountable for it. Most criminals, not all, but most criminals do not grow up in an environment in which there is accountability, structure, and discipline. They are raised in a manner in which they can do whatever the French toast they want, whenever they want, however they want.
Yeah.
Like, for example, growing up, I never had an issue. Some people say, well, I have problems with authority. I never had problems with authority because growing up, it was, I'm going to do what the heck I'm told, or I'm going to get my ass whooped.
Yeah.
Literally. So I told my daughter, I said, you don't know how good you got it. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to say, well, I know this is your position, mom and dad, but this is what I think and why. I wasn't allowed to provide a retort. The retort was, I'm going to put this belt to your behind. And if you ever act in contravention of someone who's in authority, my dad would tell me, your behind belongs to me. It didn't matter what the race of the person was, what religion. If you had a space and this person's in control, this person's the authority figure, you better do what the French toast they say, or else. That was consistent from birth to the moment I left my parents' home.
Yeah.
Right? Most people who engage in criminal activity or criminal sympathizers, they don't grow up in that type of environment. Oftentimes, we're finding individuals who they're being raised by parents who are criminals themselves. The home is a criminal incubator.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. And it's dangerous to just say like, oh, because of this incarceration thing, that's why we don't have wealth, because you're selling a false narrative. And once again, you're leaning on things because I had a friend who got pulled over by the police, and automatically he's gone on this thing like, oh, is it because I'm black and blah, 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 when, nah, man, you shouldn't be drink driving. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I don't think you've got a right to pull up all of this history and stuff for things that don't actually apply or is true to your current situation in that way. You're using it as some all over,
No, I got you.
And someone trying to say, yeah.
And this is something, and of course, you all know I'm not on the right. I'm a Pan-African, so I always bet on black. But this is something I've seen rather consistent on the left when we talk about combating the carceral state, where they will conflate issues regarding people who are wrongfully incarcerated with people who are justifiably incarcerated. They conflate the two. And I think they do that purposely. And I'm like, no, there are individuals who are incarcerated because they need to be there. That joker crazy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Seriously. But LMA, I'm gonna let you close us out. You could give us final thoughts, and you could go on as long as you want in terms of your soliloquy regarding, of course, the video, the discussion, and even, of course, the article that I shared by Dr. T. Hassan Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it was a good conversation. I do think that, like I said, I think, like I said, it's a cultural issue that affects both men and women, and we just need to figure out a way that we can respectfully give our disagreements, receive those disagreements, and then move, go forward. I think that's like I said, the only way forward. Yeah, I'm not gonna do it this show. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate you, brother. You are a
Absolutely.
contributor to the show. Until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Always bet on black. Peace. Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on black. Peace.